Hey guys, Ryan Gill here in the cave, and today I want to really talk to you about the context and the significance of FlintKnapping in the ancient world. So when we talk about the skilled art FlintKnapping, making extremely specialized and difficult to make points, one similar to these, and these are casts of real artifacts. I mean, look how paper thin that is. So these are all artifacts that have been cast, and they're absolute phenomenal works of art in their own right. But we have some very interesting things to keep in mind, and that is, as modern flint knappers, we start asking the questions, well, a lot of modern flint knappers are using modern tools, which isn't correct, obviously, if we're trying to recreate points. So on the one hand, we have the recreation of modern points using modern tools that are completely out of context, and that is essentially the art of FlintKnapping, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. It's simply showing art and a little bit of the skill that goes into it, but nowhere near the skill of talking about using abo tools to recreate these absolutely phenomenal pieces that so few people know how it was actually done, even in the modern world. But something that we also need to remember is primitive man, while they were skilled, they were very specifically skilled. So modern flint knappers, even the best in the country, are spread pretty thin, because one day they're trying to figure out how to make this, the next day they're trying to figure out how to make this, and the next day they're trying to work on this. And you have to realize, let's go back and maybe talk about Clovis and Folsom a minute. So here's a beautiful Clovis point, and not every Clovis point is absolutely beautiful, not every Folsom point is absolutely beautiful, but realistically we're taking the best of the best, and that's what we're casting. But they are some absolutely wonderfully made points that didn't happen on accident. But then you'd ask, well, how on earth were they able to create stuff that looked as good as this does? And we have to remember, this is probably the most important key in all of this, is they weren't trying to make this today and then this tomorrow. They worked with the same tools, the same 1 to 3 or 4 rock sources in the area or within trade areas, and they made the same point over and over and over, and that's all they did for their whole lifetime, is make a single style or variant of that style their whole life. That's all they did. So if you only ever spent all of your time learning to make Clovis and fluting Clovis, you'd become very, very proficient at it. Unlike today's knappers, where we're trying to make everything. So it is very difficult for modern day knappers to create a Clovis point that is fluted on both sides like this, that's done with true primitive techniques and no jigs or anything like that, but it certainly can be done. Marty Reuter is a phenomenal example of that, but he's the exception. He spends a phenomenal amount of time just learning how to do these, a lot of earlier points with only abo tools. He doesn't spread himself too thin. He has dedicated himself really hard to what he does, and he's become very good at it. There's all kinds of different things that are going to play into the role of how primitive peoples are better at different jobs than others, and that your flint napper may end up, it's traditionally passed down that this is how his dad made it, and he learned this from his dad, and when they try something new, the elders, very traditionally based, say that's not how we do it, and you need to learn how to do this. So they're forced to learn how to do it until finally the elders are gone and somebody is ready to break the cycle, and then they move on. But in talking with Justin Cook this morning, we had a great conversation, and he's a friend of mine and also a phenomenal flint napper, and he specializes in certain techniques, and he's the same exact way that I am, that he struggles with doing some of these Clovis type replica points, in the fact that we're not seeing these common double flutes, and that's, again, if that's all we ever built, we'd probably be a little bit better at it. And so I asked him what he's kind of the best at doing, and then compare that to what I do. So this is a perfect example. So points like this, like hunting points for arrows, is what I specialize in. I build hundreds of these every single year for customers. So whether it's because I have loved to make them and I sat down and do it, I am making these over and over. So I do this more than anything, and that's why when people see a whole row of the points that I make, they all look exactly the same. They're all the same size, they're all the same sharpness, they're all just about the same thickness, that they're so very similar. That's like my signature point, and I do that all the time because that's what my business is creating these points for people and myself to go out and hunt big game with in the modern world, but with primitive techniques. And it's only been relatively recently that I've started to dip into some of the other techniques, you know, to create with the indirect percussion and freehand napping, things that before I didn't need to create these. So if we really consider the fact that this is my specialty point, it's no wonder that I'm able to recreate it over and over and over, and people, you know, assume that, you know, that they're made from cut and ground slabs because they're all exactly the same, and that's not the case at all. Just like the guy that probably makes this point, he probably can lay down a whole row of these that look pretty much exactly the same, just because that's what you specialize in building. So when we go back, and the Folsom is such the great example to talk about with this. Luckily it's cast, so you can't break it, it's plastic. But a cast of a real artifact that it's, I mean, fully fluted. And I mean, the thing is so thin you can see through it. I know you can on the camera, but it is incredibly, incredibly thin, fine work. And it takes an incredibly skilled napper to be able to do this. But the reason that not many people are doing it today is because you have to spend a phenomenal amount of time and really know the secret. Everybody's trying to dissect the secret because nobody truly knows. But they knew how to do it, and they had somebody to teach them how to do it. And that's all they did for pretty much their whole life, was make these Folsom points. So it's no wonder that they got very, very good at it. So just again, some food for thought in regards to the specialty points that we find, that we can say, well, primitive man this was the height of the flint napping was this time, and people have gone backwards, which is not true at all, because these people, there was a little bit of fluting involved, but on this one there's none. And I mean, look how paper thin that is, made out of rock. That doesn't happen just once in a while on accident. When you're finding casts or when you're finding artifacts that are this thin and worked over, they specialized in getting them thin because that's what they did all the time, and they got very, very good at it. So it's not that this was necessarily the height of flint napping. They were very limited in what they were making. This is what they made for a couple thousand years, and this is what they made for, I don't even know how long the Folsom culture at the end of the end of the Paleo. So I don't know, a few hundred to 1,000, maybe a little bit more than that. I'm not exactly sure. It's not terribly long, and it's not nearly as diverse as Clovis. So it's not that it's the height of it. They're just highly specialized in doing this one thing over and over and over. In fact, I pretty much guarantee you, if you took Folsom guy and said, make me one of these, he'd never get it that thin. Wouldn't have a chance. The only way he knows how to get them thin is the dang flute-a-dang thing from base to tip. And he's way better at it than any of us were. And this person here, if you asked them to flute this point, base to tip, they'd fail at it miserably, pretty much like I do whenever I try it. So, interesting food for thought. Thanks for following along. As always, feel free to drop your comments down, down in the comments section. I love to hear from you guys. I don't know it all, absolutely not. It's just a lot of theory based on the practical application of me doing this stuff, talking to other intelligent guys like Justin Cook and Marty Reuter, and shooting a lot more that I'll never ever be able to mention here, but those are the recent guys I've been yakking at. So anyway, thanks for following along, and I will catch you on either the next adventure or the next cave talk we do.